We are excited to have with us tonight Sid Caesar, NH7C, who will talk to us about the proposed 8-meter amateur radio band currently under consideration at the FCC. Sid is a member of our Montgomery Amateur Radio Club and a past board member, but tonight he comes to us in his role as the ARRL Maryland, DC Section Public Information Coordinator. Sid previously served on the ARRL National Public Relations Committee, most recently as its national chairman. Sid has a 35-year career in public safety and emergency management, including having served as the Spectrum Manager for U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, as well as its representative to the Interdepartmental Radio Advisory Committee. Presently, Sid is the co-chair of the Communications Committee of the Heritage Emergency National Task Force, created to protect the nation's cultural heritage from the damaging effects of natural disasters and other emergencies. Sid was first licensed as a teenager and is currently an amateur extra. He is a life member of ARRL, the Potomac Valley Radio Club, and the Big Island Amateur Radio Club in Hawaii. Sid holds numerous public safety certifications, including professional firefighter, National Registry paramedic, and fire safety inspector. Wow. Okay, so welcome, Sid. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. And now it's over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Alex. Really appreciate it. And all that information, and well, now coffee costs $5 for a cup. So that and $5 and you can get a cup of coffee at Starbucks. So, all right. Well, today I am going to talk about the 8-meter band, and is going to be an informal, non-classified discussion. Alex had contacted me a while back after talking with Marty about what's going on with 8 meters. So I did a little digging to find out what I could learn about 8 meters. I've been watching 8 meters for quite a long time, and so I was really interested to get a little deeper into my knowledge. So I'm going to be happy to answer everybody's questions. While I'm talking, it might be difficult to actually look in the chat box, but if you have a question, put it in there and we'll get to it. We've got plenty of time, Alex says. So for the next 3 hours or so, we will definitely get into all the information and questions that we could ever really want. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody hear me okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, good. All right. And I am going to do my best to manipulate this properly. And you should see the screen. Is that true?
Yes.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. I'm going to go to the slide turner and I'm going to be in good shape. All right. So it's the 3rd of May. Don't know how it got that far into this year. Okay. For those of you that saw my name on the announcement, I'm not that Sid Caesar, but I do try to have fun and get some laughs. I've got the face for radio, voice for newsprint, and I can't spell, so I talk a lot. You will notice that. All right, as Alex mentioned, I try to stay very active, even during my time with the federal government. I try to stay very active with amateur radio. And as I was told on a recent ham radio call, I need to learn how to say no. But in this case, Alex asked me, and I'm happy to do it. All right, 8-meter band. When you saw this on your email, when it was talked about on the repeater, did you think that was a typo? I bet some of you did. That's why you're here. All right, the 8-meter band, as you can probably figure out, it is halfway in between the 10-meter band and the 6 meters. There's a lot of experimentation that's going on, and I hope to cover some of that and dip into that and talk about it. I hope you like my circuit board looking background. I hope you can see everything okay. I saw that and said, hey, why not? It's better than what I had before. So there's some difference, and there are a lot of people who want to learn more about the 8-meter band and how propagation works. So we'll get into that. And I'm sure, since we're all hams, how in the world do you get on 40 megahertz without a radio? And so we'll talk about that a little bit later. This is an example of an FT650, which apparently a 3-key, or hold 2 keys down while you turn the power on, and it just opens up the whole transmitter. but we'll talk a little bit more about that. All right, 8 meters, 40 megahertz. I was really surprised that this had such a long history. Looking back and checking on it, it was something in Europe, a little bit in Australia, and even experimenters here. In the 20s, people were still spark gapping it, and all of a sudden they're up on 40 megahertz. That must have been super high frequency. People probably thought you could cook chickens at the end of your antenna. It was such a high frequency. So I did pull out these call signs, 6TA and 6LL. They were pioneers in the United States working on this area of the spectrum. But the king of 40 megahertz users, 8 meter, the granddaddy of them all, Sputnik 1, transmitted on 2 frequencies, 20 megahertz and 40 megahertz. QRP 1 watt, but it sure made a difference. All right, 8 meters. Now it's ham radio. And I did the math. I probably do math better than I spell. And I said, wait a minute, 40 megahertz, that's not 8 meters. It's hardly even rounding up. So just like we do, and I did a little looking at this too, did a little math. Amateur radio, somebody calls it something, it's discussed on the air, it's discussed on Zoom, you talk about it at the Ham Fest, Dayton Hamvention coming up, and it's just a common term that's used. So actually, it's probably a little more interesting to call it the 8 meter band rather than the 7.5 meter band. But just like some of these other examples, we don't call 40 meters 42 meters, even though it's closer to that. So that's, I know that when I did some research, there were a lot of people online in chat rooms and things saying, hey, what do you mean? What's 8 meters? All right, who's interested in 8 meters? Well, the government uses it a lot. And they specifically use meteor scatter. When I was at the Department of Interior, I actually met the people that run some of the meteor scatter systems that are set up. A lot of it's out west, and it's for snowpack monitoring or some slow speed weather information that gets, oh, sorry. I guess it moved over. My apologies for covering my text there. But just like we would as amateurs on 10 or 6 meters, they point the antennas properly, and then every day, sometimes in the early morning, that's when the data gets moved. If there's some meteor showers, maybe it gets moved quicker. I didn't know much about this Alaskan meteor burst communication system used by the Weather Service. And as has become popular with the WSJT digital modes and the MSK 144, there's a lot of meteor scatter that happens even on 10 meters, 10, 6 and up. Some of you may have done that or be active there, being the ping jockeys. Some of the current users, radio astronomy, the federal government, licensed two-way land mobile radio, military's got a lot of different things in there between 30 and the bottom of the FM broadcast dial. We all remember our old cordless phones. Some of those things are still in use. Take your scanner or take your radio and listen. There's still a lot of people that use those. And right there, right underneath 6 meters. And then of course, for kids, handy talkies, and then other licensed services. I didn't know this, so I put it in there. Broadcast band used to be 42 to 50 megahertz before it was moved up to 88 to 108. Thought I put that in there. All right. Here's the only official slide from the federal government. And of course, I distilled this down from what the NTIA and the FCC have on their websites. As you can imagine, when I went to the NTIA and looked at their website, their explanation of the FCC was one sentence, and then they had paragraphs upon paragraphs talking about the NTIA. And same thing, go to the FCC, they've got one sentence for the NTIA and then everything else about the FCC. The bottom line is the government users use the NTIA as for spectrum management, spectrum issues, and the FCC is for everything else that's not government. I did a lot of work on satellite links between Centers for Disease Control physicians who are in Africa and working on different disease outbreaks, and a link from right here in Rockville to land stations in Africa. And the federal government didn't have enough bandwidth on their satellites, so we had to get licenses for the federal government on FCC frequencies for satellites. What a mess. And I had to renew it every 6 months, and it was never fun. All right. Why is amateur radio interested in 8 meters? Well, why are we interested in any meters? It's experimentation, learning more about propagation. There might be some public safety, emergency response. We have many partners. This is another band that can be used. But as I put the little Star Trek symbol in here, to boldly go where no one has gone before. There's always somebody who wants to be the first on the band and wants to be the first worked all states, the first person with the meteor scatter contact, first person on a repeater, those kinds of things. There's a lot of interest, but then there's a lot of other people, QRZ chat rooms and other places that don't we have enough frequencies? Why are we here? Why do we want to look at 8 meters? So as many facets as there are in amateur radio, somebody could figure out how to use it. All right. Is this 8 meter allocation something that's feasible? Talking to a few people who have some inside knowledge or have been looking at this for a while, they look to what happened for amateurs in the 60 meter band at 5 megahertz. And that's the newest, latest, best example of how amateur radio and the federal government, NTIA, FCC, all the players work together to come up with these 5 channels for interagency communication, and having amateur radio be part of that experimentation. And especially with the idea of this channelized band plan. I remember when 60 meters first was announced, there were a lot that did not understand or even figured on how amateurs could use the channelized band plan. But I feel I get on 60 meters on a regular basis, usually on data modes, and I see that everybody's using it properly. I feel it's a good shared resource. Yes, sure, there's always somebody with a stuck transmitter or somebody who not paying attention to the QSO in progress, but it for the most part, when I'm on there, it's an enjoyable time. All right, so I talked to as many people as I could to get ready for tonight, and the person that gave me the most information is Michelle Bradley, and her call sign is Kilo Uniform 3 November, KU 3N. And she has put forth a petition for rulemaking that is specific to 8 meters and getting that started for approval for amateur radio use. Specifically, her petition for rulemaking, and I'll have the number here in a minute, RM 11843. It's a request to have the FCC coordinate with the NTIA to allow for amateur use of a section of the 8 meter band. And her proposal talks about weak signal experimentation, general amateur use, beacons, APRS, digital modes, but not FM. and I found it very interesting. I read it a couple times, and then I contacted her. The petition for rulemaking was sent in and published in 2019. Of course, we had COVID, and these are some of her comments that I wrote down. There hasn't been a lot of action recently on RM 11843. There have been some experimental licenses, and I'll have a slide here with that'll have some call signs of some active amateurs who have the experimental licenses. These licenses were granted for what looks like a 2-year period when I looked these up on the FCC database, and many of them are going to come to their 2-year conclusion here in July. So I hope that the FCC does something so that we can keep those going and gives those people some type of extension. On the people that do experiment, they are able to transmit and receive, and there are many people around the country and then over in Europe and in other places where even if they can transmit, they listen, they monitor, like the Whisper and APRS and some of the other digital modes. People leave their radios on to see when the band opens and where it opens to. All right, so as part of Michelle's proposal, the reason that she's asking the FCC to discuss this with the National Telecommunications and Information Administration is because the spectrum that she's looking for is controlled by the NTIA. And so that it's a problem because they have many things that are taking their time. Their plates are pretty full with regular day-to-day business. So, and then COVID, of course. So she's looking for some opportunities to renew interest and try to get this moving. Now, one of her comments included that there's some recent proposals to change 60 meters. So she's hoping that any of the changes to 60 meters and potentially it not being a channelized allocation, that might impact the 8-meter allocation if that would ever happen. So for right now, I asked her what amateurs could do, and part of it was to increase knowledge and awareness for our elected officials, and also to find out what the intentions of the ARRL at all levels might do, and to find out if they are going to be supportive of this. So the future is unknown. And unfortunately, there are only 7, I believe 7 active stations in the United States that can transmit. And the FCC has denied numerous new requests for experimental licenses to go along with the 7 that are active. All right, I touched on it earlier. Even if we had an allocation, how are you getting on there? So there's limits to what's available, but I did a search today on eBay and found all kinds of surplus VHF equipment in the $200 to $300 range. Those are both mobiles and HTs. Some of them look like they were just pulled out of a squad car or fire apparatus. Some of it looked almost brand new. I was really surprised. I would have thought the price would have been way up, but maybe there's just not much of a market right now for VHF low band equipment. Let's checking out the antennas. Some of the commercially available log periodics are available that would cover this band. verticals, of course. And then I put in there a lot of the folks that monitor these frequencies around 8 meters are using the software-defined radio to listen in, and using their scanner antenna or their other amateur radio antennas. So just as a reference, I wanted to find out how big a quarter wave ground plane was, figure out how big the antenna is going to be on top of my car. And it might be slightly large if it was just all antenna and no coil. So 5.84 feet, so almost 6 feet. So it might look like a big antenna. Maybe we can take our 102-inch CB whips and cut it down and make it work for our cars. Although this says 2021, I couldn't find an updated picture that looked nice for the presentation. But most, if not all of these stations are active. Some of them use the whisper mode. Some are using FT8 and FT4, the digital modes. Some actually are using CW. So they've got their a beacon set up when it's not in use. Some of these people do have active contacts, QSOs, on the air, especially when they're alerted that there's some type of band opening. Some of the information, I've been monitoring the page of EI7GL for quite a long time. That listing right there is specifically for the 40 megahertz page. And this is just almost overwhelming information worldwide about equipment, people who are operating, band openings, especially after tests, beacon reports, all kinds of different things. So if you Google EI7GL, you'll get to the EI7GL blogspot.com, and you'll see all kinds of tabs for 10 meters, 6 meters, 8, 2, 4, all kinds of experimentation. It's good reading, and I really enjoy it. I have that on my regular list to check in and see. The request to use, or for the FCC to talk to NTA about getting on 8 meters, that's the second point there for the press release. And then there's also a 40 megahertz and 60 megahertz Facebook page that shares a lot of information, mostly European information. All right. So I've done a lot of talking so far. So I want to find out if there are some questions that I can answer or find the answer to for everybody on the call. Oh, a lot of hands. All right. Marty, why don't you go ahead, and you may have some additional information to share with the group. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, take off the mute button. Additional information. Well, I have some things I might be able to share with you. I talked recently with Bob Familio, who is the Hellenic Division Director. We chatted about this meeting. I said, Bob, I'm going to attend their meeting, and we're going to talk about the 8 meter band. And he got very excited when he heard that. I think our conversation was mostly focused around a use case. What would be the use case for 8 meters, similar to 6 meters, and the European, especially Ireland, uses it quite a bit, and their band plan is a mixed mode band plan. So they have voice, they have CW and other things. There's also was early interest in putting beacons on 40 megs, which would be a very valuable asset, especially since it would be new, having 40 meter propagation beacons. Now, I do know that there was some there was some talk about the harmonics of 40 meter. One of which happens to be the third harmonic, which is right in the middle of the aircraft band. It's 121 megahertz. So limitations on power, limitations on that type of thing, especially when it would be interference. And we know the aircraft band is mostly AM, although there is some FM there. And then lastly is that much what you said there, Sid, the amount of progress that's been made has been very minimal. It's a matter of fact, if you, as I did, or as you did, I searched to see if I could find anything new. And it really, all of it was sort of European, based in European, a lot of conversation, a lot of information going on in European modes, or European area. The other one that I wanted to share was, and you already have done that, about looking for equipment, public service equipment, much like you were talking about, which would be state police, fire, paging systems that were in the 8 megahertz band. But we don't know what's going to be decided on as far as bandwidth and all those other things the FCC sets rules for. So I would say at this point, until we get a clearer picture of what we can expect from the agency, I would say if you're going to buy something, it's kind of an investment, right? If you buy it now and the rulemaking, comes out that we can use the 8 meter band, that piece of equipment might actually not be suitable for using on 8 meters. But very interesting, and I wanted to also invite anyone who has, Sid, thank you very much for a very well-rounded presentation. Please pass it up to me for dissemination across the Atlantic Division. I talked to Alex back this at the Hamfest, and that was get a coalition together of interested people, because that's where you can get this started at. And look at the turnout this evening. So I thank both of you for bringing all of us together. And I would like, once this gets published, I'm going to certainly push this information to Bob and get it disseminated to the Atlantic Division for you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it. All right. I see some other hands. So Mark, why don't you go ahead?
Yes, thank you. Excellent presentation. Really well done. And thank you for providing us with that data. Sounds very exciting. My question is, these radios that are pulled from, police cars and fire trucks and so on, they're all FM. And while I suppose one could convert an FM rig to CW without a whole lot of effort, they certainly couldn't do sideband, and they certainly couldn't do other digital modes. So I guess as was said just a moment ago, you buy the equipment now and you hope you can use it, because once the band is open, whatever equipment is out there is going to get snarfed up pretty quickly. So what is your feeling about that?
I agree with what you're saying, and especially with a lot of the unknown. I was really surprised that there are even some companies that are making transverters to go from 10 meters to 8 meters. And I know that I had one that went, a transverter that went from 2 meters to 6 meters. That's how I got on when I was first licensed. I took a ICOM 02AT and hooked it up and got into simplex and then repeaters and things. So I'm sure that if it does happen, that there'll be some either kit building, or there'll be some companies that'll put that together, because you're right, the wideband FM, as the proposal is, would not be something that if it was agreed to, that would not work on that band. Excellent, thank you. And November 0 Mexico. See a hand up there.
Good day. I was going to actually mention that most of the surplus gear that I'm aware of for the 8-meter band is in fact FM only, and a lot of the surplus equipment, like the Motorola's, those that cover the 8-meter band are the ones that we convert to use on 6 meters. I think many of us have a few of those laying around. And last, the availability and price point on old 11-meter whips is limited now. They've gotten expensive. They're not, you can't just buy them at every corner grocery store like you could in the 70s. So back to Net.
Oh, well, thank you. I'm rich now. I appreciate that information. I think I've got 4 or 5 of them laying around. I'm not going to tell anybody where though. All right, going to November 3, Alpha Delta Echo. Good evening, Damien.
Hi, one comment or 2 comments. I put a comment in the chat for people with base stations. Your 20 meter antenna, if it's a dipole, is about 3 times what you would need for an 11 meter dipole. So you could transmit at a reasonably favorable SWR, because that's an odd multiple of a dipole length. So that should also work for 8 meters. Plus, if you've had a Mars mod on your transceiver, then you have essentially you can go to the 40 meter range and you have an all mode transceiver at that point.
Oh, very interesting. Yes, that's good. Good.
Or 40 megahertz. I mean, you can do that on the Mars modded systems.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I saw some conversations about the folks that are using the software defined radios, and they're talking about modifying some of the newer Chinese radios, and so there are people who are experimenting. Of course, they just say they transmit into a dummy load, but we don't know that for sure. I trust them. I really do. Good. All right. Any other thoughts, questions?
I do.
Yes.
But
Yes, Alex, go ahead.
I still don't know how to do that little hand wavy thing, but
Oh, you did fine.
thank you. Thank you. So I know when we were talking to Marty at the Hamfest, we talked about uses. And when I saw the list from the woman who filed a petition with the FCC, and I'm glad she did, that was fabulous. But it wasn't the use that Marty and I were talking about at Hamfest wasn't on the list. And so we had talked about, and Marty, chime in if I say something wrong here. We had talked about how the 8-meter band was traditionally the public safety and service band. So the Red Cross was on it, a lot of the police organizations were on it, and all of that. And so that may be an argument for the FCC would be that we wouldn't use it for contesting. We would use it as a public part of our public safety mission.
Interoperability.
Yeah. So am I saying this really poorly, Marty? Can you help me out here?
No. You're doing it justice here. I'll tell you why. We know that right now that 60 meters is one of those channelized bands that does indeed complement the crossband or complement other agencies in using it. What there isn't is there isn't a similar band that could be designated as a calling band, much like the ITU does with a lot of other HF bands. And I mean low frequency HF bands. I'll tell you firsthand, you go to a disaster, there's not enough room to set up a 40 meter anything. Okay. You just don't have the space. But this band, as well as the 60 meter band, is very, very, you're talking as Sid said, a very accommodating antenna length. And so one use case could be that could make it a designated calling band for disaster services. So meet here and go somewhere else, or coordinate across it. Now, I also mentioned to Bob Familio, how many of you know what ALE is? I think many of you might, right? Yes, you do. Of course you do, Sid. Okay. All right. So you know that whole thing with ALE, right? The idea is that frequency, the frequency is decision is really made by what is your most reliable band to be on. So the question is, would someone come back and say, well, 40 meters is not that reliable, right? I mean, sorry, 8 meters, 40 megs is not that reliable, but that isn't the case, and we know that. Matter of fact, 6 meters was initially designed to make communications over short distances very suitable in like the Caribbean islands, for example. Okay. So that's exactly what you're saying, Alex, is there an opportunity to make this an interoperable band and use it for primarily use it for disaster communications, emergency communications. So there would be no contesting. It would be exclusively used for that. I believe that's what we were talking about.
Yeah, I think so. That was a great discussion at Hamfest, by the way, about that, because you were talking about maybe it could be like one of the workstations. And also, well, there was a discussion about it, somebody said, well, what about the startup cost? Well, the infrastructure is already there because the 8 meter band is being used. So there's already the antennas there. There's already the radios there. So it's not like we would have to start from scratch. So that's already present. And I heard a rumor that one of the agencies was giving up their 8 meter presence. And I think it was the Red Cross or somebody like that, because they're switching over to whatever. So there's openings, but I think that my own personal opinion, and I'm stealing this opinion from you, Marty, because you were the one that said it first. So this is my opinion now because you said it, and I thought that this is exactly right, is the way to reinvigorate the FCC discussion is to give them a purpose other than, kind of like experimenting, that we really do have this need that can be filled by this 8 meter band. Does that make sense? And
That's
so, and the approach would be different. So the petition now, if the list that in the petition were experimentation and general just FM use and stuff like that, that's not, she opened the door. We need to put a little bit more in there in terms of that this is an important need. This is not just hams having more fun. This is like a critical need for the community. And if we can reinvigorate it that way, because I think what the petition that's there now is great. It's wonderful, but it's not going to catch anybody's attention. And I do think that with the move that the first responders are doing, to all these everybody's leaning forward, trying to find the best method of comms. And I think we can add to that conversation with our suggestion of how, and especially the part about where we can be interoperable. I love that word, interoperable. Everybody shows up, they got a different radio, they got a different organization, but guess what? We're talking to each other. And it's got to be from the first moment, because that's when that's when the lives have to be saved, and that's when the buildings are burning, and that's when we have to turn on the comms and it works right away. So that's your reasoning.
Yeah, and just to also highlight what class of ham license would be allowed to work in this band, and then secondly, which part of the band is going to be which part of the band would Region 2 be in, vice Region 1 or Region 3? So not all the not all the HF frequencies all line up. I remember calling a station one time for I first got my general license, and he very graciously told me that I shouldn't be on that frequency, and he was absolutely right. I didn't realize I was outside of my band privilege. But so use case is who's going to use it, how are we going to use it, and then what are the rules of using it, right? If you think about Mars, for example, you don't get on Mars frequencies unless you're a Mars operator. But nothing says you can't cross-band. You could cross-band to this frequency or to this band as well. So thank you, Alex. That was a great description of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your interest in this, Marty. I'm going to hand it back over to
Excellent.
Sid. Thank
All
you.
right. How about any other comments, questions, thoughts? All right. I don't see anything else in the chat. I don't see any real hands or the other hand that's in the corner. So Alex, I'll wrap it up by saying I really appreciate the opportunity to work with you and the club and learn a little bit more about this, talk to some new people I didn't know before, and bring this information to the club. I'm going to keep up on it because I threw out a lot of email messages and sent things to people, and they haven't gotten back to me. So I'm sure there'll be some other information that'll pop in, or now I can say, hey, thanks for the information, for the presentation, and there'll be more discussion because we're radio people, and even though we might say 73, there's always that next conversation that we'll have. So I really appreciate the opportunity and everyone's attention and the great questions. So thank you.
Thank you. What a great presentation. Thank you. Everybody's got their virtual hands and their real hands. So thank you. A lot of work, a lot of great information. Very useful. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So we're going to stop the recording.